Pomegranate Disease, A Conversation with an Expert Gardener by Brad Tuttle. I asked ChatGPT, this is the first year with significant pomegranate fruit, but some appear to have a fungus. What's going on here? I'm familiar with pomegranate bushes in California over 50 years ago and don't remember this problem.
ChatGPT said, Brad, these photos are actually quite helpful. The pattern tells a story. My first impression is that this is not a typical leaf fungus spreading randomly over the plant, but rather a fruit disease, most likely one of these. 1. Anthracnose, most likely. 2. Alternaria fruit rot, black heart, possible. 3. Bacterial blight, less likely from these photos. Why I think anthracnose is the leading candidate. The fruit shows large black sunken patches, numerous small black specks surrounding the larger lesions. Lesions beginning on the surface while the fruit is still green, and many fruits affected simultaneously. Those are classic anthracnose symptoms. The fungus infects flowers or very young fruit, then often becomes obvious as the fruit enlarges. What makes me think it isn't simply sunburn? Sunburn usually occurs only on the southwest side of exposed fruit. Produces tan or brown leathery patches. Doesn't create all those tiny black pepper-like spots. Your fruit has numerous small spots and expanding dark lesions, which points much more toward disease. Regarding California versus South Carolina, this is probably the biggest reason you're seeing something now. California's pomegranate climate is almost ideal. Long, hot summers. Very low humidity. Little summer rainfall. South Carolina gives the fungus exactly what it wants. Warm temperatures, high humidity, afternoon thunderstorms, leaves and fruit staying wet for hours. Many fruit diseases that barely exist in California become annual problems in the Southeast. The good news, your bush itself actually looks vigorous. From the whole plant photo I notice, dense, healthy foliage. Good color, lots of fruit, no obvious dieback. That suggests the plant is healthy. The disease is primarily attacking the fruit. One thing I noticed, a couple of fruits in your photos have lesions concentrated around the blossom end, where the crown is, while others have isolated round spots on the side. That combination makes me also wonder about alternaria, because it often enters through the blossom end and can rot the fruit internally, while the outside still looks fairly normal. If you cut one of the fruits that looks only mildly affected and find the inside black or moldy while the rind isn't terribly damaged, alternaria moves higher on the list.
Here's a picture of 2 pomegranates cut in half.
This is very helpful. The interior changes my diagnosis. The fruit does not look like classic alternaria, black heart. If it were, I would expect much of the inside to be black and moldy, while the outside might not look terribly bad. Instead, I see the arils are still white because the fruit is immature. Most of the interior is healthy. There is some browning of the membranes immediately beneath the worst external lesions. The rot appears to be progressing from the outside inward, not starting deep inside. That pushes me back toward anthracnose, or another surface fruit rot rather than black heart. The encouraging news: the disease hasn't destroyed the fruit internally. If this had happened a month later, many of these pomegranates might still have been edible after trimming away the damaged portions. One thing catches my eye. The lesions are remarkably round and well-defined. In the lower fruit, there's almost a bullseye appearance. That sometimes happens where a fungal spore lands on a wet fruit and begins growing from that exact point.
There has been mulch applied in the past. Should I clean the ground and quit using mulch?
No, I would actually continue using mulch, but I'd change how it's being used. Looking at your photo, I noticed several things. The base of the plant is fairly open, which is good. I don't see a thick, soggy layer of mulch pressed against the trunks. The soil looks rather bare and dry now. There are old leaves and fruit debris under the bush. The mulch itself probably isn't causing the fruit disease. The bigger issue is that infected fruit and leaves can harbor fungal spores that reinfect the plant the following spring. Here's what I would do this fall. Clean up thoroughly. Pick up every fallen pomegranate. Remove mummified fruit still hanging in the bush. Rake out as many diseased leaves and fruit pieces as practical. Refresh the mulch. After cleanup, apply 2 to 3 inches of fresh wood chips or pine bark. Keep it about 6 inches away from the trunks, so moisture doesn't stay against the bark. Prune this winter. Your bush is quite dense. In California, that isn't much of an issue, but in South Carolina, I'd remove several interior stems to let sunlight and air move through the canopy. Faster drying after rain is one of your best defenses. Avoid overhead irrigation. If you irrigate, water the soil rather than wetting the foliage. One thing I noticed from your earlier pictures: several fruits are hanging inside the shrub rather than out on the edges. Those interior fruits stay damp much longer after our humid South Carolina mornings and afternoon thunderstorms. That's another reason I'd open up the center of the plant. Here's what I'd do over the next year. Now, remove every diseased fruit, whether on the bush or on the ground. Dispose of them rather than leaving them under the shrub. Winter. Thin out perhaps 20 to 30% of the interior wood. Your shrub has many stems, which is normal for pomegranates, but I'd selectively remove some of the oldest or most crowded canes to improve air circulation. Spring. Important. As flowers begin to appear, if your weather turns into one of those warm, rainy South Carolina springs, consider a preventive copper fungicide. Once these lesions appear, fungicides do very little, so the timing is before infection. I have one question that may solve the mystery. Did we have an unusually wet spring in your part of South Carolina this year? If these infections started during flowering and early fruit set, a rainy bloom period would fit this almost perfectly.
Yes, we had a wet early spring and a dry late spring. Here's a picture of some fungicide from my storage closet. Will this work?
Yes, the wet early spring followed by a dry late spring fits the disease pattern very well. Infection likely occurred while the flowers and tiny fruit were wet, and the symptoms simply became visible as the fruit grew. As for the fungicide in your photo, Spectracide Immunox contains myclobutanil, which is an excellent fungicide for many diseases such as powdery mildew, rusts, and black spot on roses. It also has activity against some anthracnose fungi. However, there are 2 important considerations. Check the label carefully. Since you're growing fruit you intend to eat, the label must specifically allow use on the crop or group of crops you're treating. If pomegranate is not listed, I would not use it on fruit intended for consumption. Timing matters much more than the product. By the time the fruit looks like yours does, the infection has already happened. Spraying now won't heal the damaged fruit. The spray is most useful next spring, beginning around bloom or just after petal fall if the weather turns warm and rainy. My recommendation: for your situation in South Carolina, I would lean toward this plan. This year, sanitation only. Remove diseased fruit from the bush and the ground. Prune this winter to open the canopy. Next spring, if forecasts call for several days of warm, rainy weather during bloom, begin preventive fungicide applications according to the product label. Many home orchardists in the Southeast have good success with copper-based fungicides for pomegranates because they are broadly effective against many fruit diseases and are commonly labeled for edible fruit crops. One thing I noticed in your photo: the Immunox bottle looks like you've had it for a while. If it's several years old, check the date and make sure it hasn't been exposed to freezing or excessive heat. Even if it's still usable, I'd verify that the current label includes the crop you want to treat. Overall, I think your pomegranate has a good future. The shrub itself looks vigorous, and I suspect next year's crop could be dramatically cleaner.